and welcome to edition 4 of Natural Gas World's In a Nutshell podcast. Joining me today is my executive or editor-in-chief, William Powell in London, and our special guest today is Alfred Sorensen, CEO of Pieridae Energy here in Calgary. For those of you who don't know Alfred, he is the CEO of Pieridae Energy, has been since 2012 when the company was founded. He's got 30 years of experience in the oil and gas industry, both in Canada and internationally. And what many people may not know is that he was instrumental in starting Galveston LNG, which became Kitimat LNG, and which has been subsequently sold around several times and is now a project of Australia's Woodside and Chevron. Prior to all of that, Alfred was president of Duke Energy Europe, and before that, president of Duke Energy Canada. Welcome, Alfred.
Thank you very much. And thanks for the invite as well.
Okay. To kick things off, most people I'm sure know about Goldboro LNG, but for those who don't, can you just give us the elevator pitch version of your project?
All right. Well, Goldboro is part of Pieridae, and Pieridae is Canada's only fully integrated LNG natural gas company. We basically operate from the flange, from the field right to the flange, and Goldboro being the way we are going to monetize our gas supply that we currently control and will develop in Western Canada.
And it's an 8 million metric ton per year project, is that correct?
It's 10 metric tons, two trains, each train 5 metric tons, and the first train has been sold to Uniper, and the second train is a couple of European utilities. Our entire project is very Eurocentric and is very much geared to delivering LNG into Western Europe in the first quarter of 25.
Okay, you mentioned that it's Canada's first fully integrated project. Can you tell me what that means and maybe give us an overview of the various components, starting from your supply sources in Western Canada to your market potential in Europe?
Well, I think when we talk about who we are, when you look at there's kind of two basic business models that the LNG industry has, similar to the rest of the world. Our project is a fully integrated one where we control the gas supply as well as the LNG terminal. And the second business model is more like what you see in the Gulf Coast, where the facilities act more like a midstream asset, and they toll their capacity to end users or third-party users, such that the third party is either responsible to get the gas supply itself, or perhaps even the marketing arm of the LNG terminal may provide the natural gas. But in our scenario, we actually control the upstream as well. We spent the last couple of years acquiring gas supply in Western Canada. Today, we are we're the largest foothills producer in Canada, and we're probably one of the largest in North America. We currently have control about, on a gross basis, about 1 million acres along the Rocky Mountains of Canada, from northeastern British Columbia down to the Canadian-US border. We are very much, one of our business tenets is very much to reuse, recycle, repurpose existing assets. So everything about our project is trying to use things that are already in existence rather than building brand new. And so we kind of compare Goldboro to Canada LNG. That project's roughly about $40 billion. Ours is about $10 billion, and the principal reason for that is we're not building all brand new assets, not new pipeline, not new gas plants for processing. Obviously, the LNG terminal is brand new, but other than that, we tend to try and reuse what's already in existence. So to answer your question, what parts of the chain? As I said, upstream we have significant production today. We are about 225 million a day of gas that we process, that we own, and what we don't own, we process about another 300 to 400 million a day. So the capacity of our existing gas plants that we acquired from Shell last year was is roughly about 750 million a day. So we currently have enough gas processing capacity to fill the entire first train of our project. And from a asset perspective, in the field, as I said, we have roughly about 1 million acres, and we've identified roughly about 500 drilling locations in that 1 million acres to eventually begin drilling at the end of 2021, and we will fill the 200 to 800 million a day that we'll need through the 500 to 600 wells that we'll drill over the 5-year period that the terminal is under construction. Then the gas transports from our gas plants onto the Nova Gas system, and that leads to the Trans-Canada system. It goes across Canada, enters into the United States just east of Montreal, and then connects up into the Maritimes Northeast pipeline. Maritimes begins at Goldboro, and that's principally why the site was chosen, is that we wanted to be as close to the existing infrastructure as possible. Maritimes Northeast was originally constructed in 99, 2000 to bring gas from Sable onshore, and transport down to the United States. The pipeline was always reversible, and matter of fact, now that Sable is no longer in operation, that the pipe has already been reversed, and Atlantic Canada is served by gas coming out of the United States. So, or some might even come from Canada now. I think there's 1 or 2 customers who have actually taken out long-term capacity on Trans-Canada. So when people ask, how do we make this economic? And it's a good question to ask. And it has a lot to do with the fact that there is a significant amount of unused capacity, both on and TC Energy, as well as on Maritimes Northeast. And we basically have worked on a transaction that effectively made us neutral as to whether we got gas from Western Canada or from the Marcellus. And that's really kind of the underlying fundamental of our project, is the fact that we wanted to neutralize the distance disadvantage of Western Canada. And the reason we're interested in Western Canadian gas resources is particularly, maybe not so much today, but 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it was obvious that Canadian gas resources were under significant valuation pressure, and we were able to acquire gas resources, to kind of put some numbers to it, roughly under 10,000 a flowing barrel. To do the exact same transaction in the United States and the Marcellus would have been closer to about 25,000 US a barrel. So a significant difference in valuation that allows for a long-term competitive advantage for the LNG terminal over time. And it's the ownership of the upstream that's important to us, because that acts as our hedge between the offshore price and what's happening in North America. So as we see what's happening right now, obviously international gas prices are such that it makes liquefaction very, very challenged at these prices. But
to say
in
the
our
least.
scenario, owning the resource upstream would allow us to continue to feed gas into the LNG terminal, regardless of if we wish to do that. It's not likely we would be producing right now, as what you're seeing in the Gulf Coast is obviously a result of the fact that gas prices are basically the same, whether you're talking about Tokyo Bay or Gulf Coast or TTF. It's basically the same price everywhere. So and obviously, if the prices stayed like this for a long period of time, you're not going to see any more LNG terminals being built. But our view is that we still have an economic facility that, with our off-taker Uniper, is they're buying the gas at market prices. So obviously today we not be making any money for sure, but when we do, it's how we put the economics of our project together is basically by owning that entire value chain from the field to the flange.
A couple of things on the transportation. It's my understanding that TC Energy has to do a little bit of capacity work in that tiny gap between Canada and the TQ&M system in Quebec and Maritimes in Northeast, and I think it's Portland Natural Gas. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. And my last conversation with TC Energy is that they're exploring about a $200 million a day capacity upgrade. Is that to accommodate your volumes, or is that something you're even discussing with TC Energy right now?
As I said, we our view is our job is to deliver gas to Empress and then pick it back up at Westbrook. There's obviously, if you look at it, the capacity is not there. There's obviously something has to be done to make it work. So between Canada and the United States, it's mostly compression that needs to be added in that area. And from East Hereford to Westbrook, there is some looping that has to be done. And we're just kind of working on that process right now of how to make it happen. TC is actually quite adverse to any risk right now, given what's happened with pipelines everywhere in not just in Canada. You've seen what's happened in the last few days, even in the United States. The Atlantic pipeline got canceled just recently, or yesterday or the day before, whenever it was. That the northeastern part of the United States is equally difficult when it comes to building pipelines, as it appears that most of Canada is. So I think the interesting thing, I think if both of Trans Mountain and Coastal, kind of get to the finish line in the next year or so, year and a half, as they go through their construction phase, that should take some of the pressure off pipelines, only because there won't be any more to be built, and maybe we go back to the environment we used to live in, where it was a relatively mundane business pipeline building is. But our view is, or TC's view is that the pipeline work that needs to be done stays in the existing right of way. It does not require any additional land outside of the existing right of way, and as a result, that will not be a significant issue to get the work that we need done in the time we need to be done. The bigger issue I'd say right now is can you finance in a marketplace where gas is selling for under $2? I think that's probably our bigger issue right now. Because if a year ago, to convince people we need roughly about to earn mid-teens type returns, we need gas price above $7.50 at the NBP or TTF, European gas price hubs, that if it was hard to convince people when prices were at $5.50 to $6 that they would make that $1.50 gap change, trying to do it from the low $2 to $7.50 might be a big challenge. So, but we're up for the challenge. So we'll see how that goes over the next few months. But I think because the project is very German eccentric, it is certainly from the very beginning, when we first signed our deal with Uniper, or back then it was still E.ON, that this was really about diversity of security of supply, and that's why the German government is willing to be a partner in the financing through the UFK. It's really all about that, and that obviously under $2 gas, there is no such thing as security of supply, but it's not the world they're planning for. They're planning for a world that where energy will eventually become more valuable. And that I think that's a significant advantage that our project has over whatever projects are left out there. And probably in the last 6-8 weeks now, we've probably seen at least 10 projects canceled or postponed. And it looked like was going to be a significant surplus of natural gas, liquefied natural gas, in the mid-20s, is probably getting closer to flat, if not short. So it's one of the principal reasons we continue to push hard on reaching our FID decision, and that is what we're kind of focused on right now. So,
I mean, one thing you've politely not mentioned is the fact you are very much nearer Germany than other US or North American terminals, I should say. You can get from northeast Canada to Germany in a matter of days, can't you? I think it's a much shorter journey, but that does knock some money off the price in terms of your margins as well.
Well, there's no doubt that that is a principal advantage of Goldboro, that from a distance perspective, Nova Scotia is halfway out in the Atlantic Ocean already, and the same reason why virtually every airplane that flies from New York and Boston and all those areas flies over Nova Scotia to go to Europe, that It's it's right on the circumference of the Earth, or where the curvature of the Earth begins, and that gives us an advantage not only to sell gas to Europe. We're half the distance from the Gulf Coast. We're half the distance from Qatar. Even going to South America, we are actually a shorter sailing distance than the U.S. So that is one of the reasons why when we started this whole project, as Dale mentioned, obviously our first project was on the west coast of Canada. That even still, we were still looking at 10 to 12 days to Tokyo Bay. That this is half the distance to as big a market as Asia is, and I think the other fundamental that we've always believed in was this convergence of price, and we didn't believe it was going to converge at $2, but
nobody believes that.
That was
you aren't alone in that.
Yeah, so that wasn't the intent, but I think the marketplace is developed now such that convergence is a reality, and that's never going to go away now. And being as close to the market as possible is going to be a real advantage, and that you'll get approximately the highest price anyway, just because of where you are. So I think that is a long-term advantage of Goldboro, is the fact that we are very close to a very large market, and that market really has very limited options from supply, and almost all of them from countries that either are aggressive towards Western Europe in one form or another. And that's even when thinking about Canada itself, when we first talked to the Europeans, or specifically to E.ON, the reason why they kind of went with our project and our Gulf Coast project in the original ask was that at that time Obama was the president of the United States, and his administration was very anti-energy export, whereas Canada has always been neutral about just about everything. And of course, into this environment today, you have a new president, not so new anymore, but the Trump administration, exact opposite of that, very energy export oriented.
Yeah.
But you've got a president that's not well respected. Is that a nice way of saying it? in Europe,
you won't get any argument here, but anyway.
So it's helped us from that perspective, and the fact that
it also seemed to us that one of the reasons why Merkel was so keen on your project was that it was showing, if you like, showing Trump that they didn't need Russia, but also not buying it from America. A nice little
win-win. And
maneuver.
We won. So that's, and trying to, we've spent a lot of time trying to explain that to the Canadian government, that, that's, I never kind of finished answer your question at the very beginning on why I describe our company that way. And one of the real reasons, we are Canadian, and virtually every other LNG project is controlled by either super majors or national oil companies, and we are different in that regard. And it's kind of been our sales pitch to the government of Canada, that they said, we are Canadian, and we're trying to build a Canadian project to export Canadian natural gas.
You can fly the flag and really mean it, in other words.
Yeah, exactly. So it's so our kind of second sales side of that is, if you can give $275 million to a super major, then you sure as hell should be able to support us. And and it has been, even all the years that we've managed to hold onto Uniper, that the government of Germany has always been kind of like, how come Canada's not in it? We're kind of stepping up. And so hopefully our argument is that we're currently making to try and make sure the project stays on schedule to the federal government of Canada, is that this is an opportunity for Canada to not shy away from a difficult market. That if we can continue to make the project happen over the next year, that project will arrive on schedule, and at a time when the pricing will return to a more normalized marketplace.
Yeah, I think the two real risks or uncertainties, aren't there? First of all, as you mentioned, is the gas price. Will it become attractive in Europe in the next 5 years when you mean to start up? Of course, then we'll have a very, very different gas market in Europe. Hydrogen might become commercially viable somehow in certain markets, in certain quantities. And you have the general reluctance amongst funds and so on to lend to projects which involve fossil fuels. And of course, Fortum is now the Finnish company, the Finnish government, I should say, is now the owner of nearly all of Uniper. So there are still some hurdles to negotiate in terms of acceptability in Europe. Will blue hydrogen become, if you like, by necessity possible? Because green hydrogen to me seems a very, very extravagant way to manufacture it. How much money will Europe have for its Green Deal and for negotiating all the objectives it set itself? I think a lot of this does sound very good politically, but when the wheels hit the ground, I think it could be a very painful experience for taxpayers such as me. that's my main concern, why I'm quite fond of gas. I write about it for a living, but also it's for a reason. I do find it interesting, and I do find it very valuable. And I am surprised by the headwinds that Europe and also now America has developed to oppose it.
Alfred, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was gonna. You mentioned earlier that you're discussing with Ottawa their support for your project. Mr. Trudeau has been, how can I put this politely, somewhat reticent to support fossil fuel projects of any stripe. What kind of support are you looking to get back from Ottawa to help push this over the FID line?
Well, we're certainly very focused on financial assistance. There's no denying that, and we've been very vocal about that. And right now, I would say equity is very difficult to raise, and it's it is certainly still a marketplace where energy has not returned value, whether in Canada or the United States, for the last 5 years, and hence trying to raise equity is quite difficult. And that's really the sales pitch we're giving to government, is that we're very much looking for the type of assistance that the province of Alberta gave to TC Energy to get Keystone across the finish line. Basically not a handout, but a hand up to get us through this period of time where we would reimburse the government once the project is up and running. So that is kind of the way we're looking at it, as the next phase of equity. So we have had, I would say, over the last 6 to 8 weeks, we have been very actively working with the province of Nova Scotia, Alberta, and the federal government. Our project is very much affects almost all of the provinces from west to east, and in one form or another. And we don't talk a lot about the second train, and the principal reason for that is we're still working quite hard on the supply side of that. But it's likely we are really kind of focusing that supply on Atlantic Canada, potentially coming out of Newfoundland, or potentially even revitalizing Sable. That and such that I think, except for Prince Edward Island, we would have effectively touched every province from coast to coast. So it's very much a transnational project. We've been selling it that way to the federal government. There's no doubt within the Trudeau cabinet there are ministers who are anti-energy, though I'm pretty sure they use it every day.
Even Mr. Butts uses it.
I'm pretty sure they do. And they probably don't even turn their cars off in the winter time to make sure they're nice and cozy when they jump into them. So it's that, but you have to say that thing with bite your tongue, or else you get nowhere. So but I think Minister O'Regan, he's the Natural Resource Minister of Canada. He's a very proud Newfoundlander and very high proponent of Atlantic Canada. And he's very much been supportive of the project and helping to get this through cabinet. So we're hoping by the early fall we will have a final decision, and such that we will be able to commence the first phase of construction before the end of the year, potentially even beginning of before 2021, and with the intent that we certainly we have our work cut out for us. It's difficult to convince people not to build a bridge to nowhere, and that is the marketplace is going to have to give us a help of a hand with hopefully recovering energy prices. And if we were to get another what happened to natural gas this past year, it was very much a perfect storm of a non-winter at the beginning of the year, quickly followed by this COVID pandemic that has completely knocked the sales out of gas consumption. And if we were to have another winter kind of like that, this past one again next year on the back of this, it's going to be hard for gas prices to recover. It's still mostly a heating and electrical fuel, and that if you don't get winter, you don't get pricing either. So that's and kind of saw what happened last year. Prices through the summer of last year weakened, but they didn't weaken substantially because Europe had significant storage capacity. And that's really the big difference between last year and this year, is that the storage was not drawn down enough during the winter because of those two factors, the weather and the pandemic. And so you just don't have enough room to put the summer gas in. And there's only two places in the world that have vapor storage, and that's Europe and North America. And that it still amazes me when you hear these last stories of these past few weeks of ships coming back to US and unloading and re-vaporizing the gas to turn it around and vaporize it one more time, liquefy it one more time. It's a very strange world we live in. But
it really is value destruction, isn't it?
We've got a few minutes left. There's a couple of points I wanted to touch on. KBR, your EPC contractor, has been working to wrap a contract for a couple of years now, and they recently announced that they're getting out of the LNG space. How has that affected your pre-FID work, and have you sorted out how that relationship will work going forward?
Yes, it's a relatively new problem, an unfortunate one for sure. And we were quite taken aback by it, to be quite frank about it. So we do not have a resolution yet. It is very much a work in progress right now. Sorry about that. We really need to figure out what KBR is willing to do, and if it's still more than likely that we have to have a fixed price of some sort in order to be financeable. The good news is, since they made their announcement, we've probably had several parties have contacted us on their own to replace them. So
lots standing at the altar, are they?
Yes, well, that's already happened twice. So twice we've been jilted. So we're trying to make sure that doesn't happen a third time.
Okay, and the second issue that I wanted us to address is a couple of months ago, the Alberta Energy Regulator had some questions about how operating licenses for two of the three gas plants in Alberta that you acquired from Shell were going to be split, and it had to do with who was responsible for what contamination. I'm assuming that you're still working on a resolution to that. Is it a simple matter of, okay, Shell, this is your mess, you have to clean it up, or is there still a shared responsibility going forward?
Are you talking about the AR mess, or are you talking about the actual mess?
Take your pick.
It's they're kind of both related anyways, and so starting with the deal we did. So Shell is absolutely on the hook for the contamination. So the original application that Shell made that was obviously rejected a few weeks ago, that really was an attempt to do something that, although the AER had been asked before they even applied that they would look at this, the response was that there was no legal way to do this. So we are working with Shell right now. It is really Shell's responsibility to come up with a solution that works. the absolute from the Pieridae perspective is that we will not cover the cost of contamination. And so however we go about doing contractually that, the AER has told us, they would rather all the licenses be transferred directly to Pieridae, that there be no splitting. And if that's the case, then Pieridae and Shell will have to come up with a commercial responsibility that will allow us to ensure that the government is kept whole. So whether that ends up being a deposit of some size or something like that, that's probably what it's going to be. But right now it is in Shell's court to resolve, and our contract is very clear that it remains Shell's responsibility. So and I think you saw Mr. Carruthers, the Shell's Canada president, they made it very clear that Shell sees the contamination as their responsibility, and they're not looking for a way to shirk their responsibilities to the taxpayers of Alberta or the citizens of the province. So I don't think it's going to be a problem for us. Certainly, from an economic perspective, it isn't, and we continue to ensure that the assets are well taken care of, and that we don't have any types of accidents which will only prove to the naysayers that we were not there to take care of them. So these assets form the basis of our project. We need them to be functioning for the next 20 years or longer, and our intention is to ensure that happens.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's pretty much our time, Alfred. I'd like to thank you very much for taking time out from your schedule.
Yep, thank you.
From the number of times your phone has rung in the background, I suspect you're in demand elsewhere. This has been, in a nutshell, Natural Gas World's fortnightly podcast on all things of interest in the gas industry. And thanks again, Alfred. We'll see all of our viewers next time.
Thanks very much for inviting me. Nice to meet you. See you again, folks.